Conservative Policy Summit. Our theme today is opportunity for all and favoritism to none. Let me tell you what that means. Towards the beginning of this past December, as Congress was wrapping up its legislative year, CBS News ran a story with the headline, "Congress Left with Big Agenda and Little Time to Get It Done." Looking at this so-called big agenda that is described, it includes the renewal of 57 tax extenders consisting of corporate giveaways for the well-connected, the extension of TRIA, an allegedly temporary program that puts taxpayers on the hook for private losses that the insurance industry is well-positioned to manage, and expanding the federal government's land takeover program. None of these so-called must-pass bills, it might surprise those who live inside the D.C. bubble to learn, register as must-pass to the overwhelming majority of folks around this country who are nervous about an uncertain job or stagnant wages, anxious to make their car payment or deal with the rising price of food and housing and education, or forced to deal with the consequences of high levels of single parenthood. Must pass in America's crony capital and must pass in the rest of the country mean very different things. And that's why we see such cynicism across the country towards its political class, and frankly, that cynicism is warranted. It's the cynicism of House of Cards, which says that politicians are willing to murder, lie, and cheat for no purpose other than power. It's the cynicism of Scandal, which says they're willing to murder, torture, and cheat for no purpose other than power. Of The Daily Show, and its claims that the political process is nothing more than a game for politicians to conceal their true motives behind a veil of absurdity. Americans are looking for an agenda in Washington that breaks through this cynicism and favoritism and speaks to their true anxieties. This is what this summit and a book that we're releasing today called Opportunity for All and Favoritism to None speaks to. It's about moving past the boring politics of Washington, D.C., the ups and downs of the consulting class, the favoritism for Boeing's bank or big business, the cynical back-scratching between regulators and those they allegedly regulate. Opportunity for All and Favoritism to None is about an agenda that should make all Americans proud of their capital city. It's an agenda worthy of Washington and Lincoln, of Jefferson and King. Today we will talk about labor reforms and growth policies that can introduce greater opportunity to the workplace, education, housing, and energy policies to help families balance their budgets. We'll talk about the policies necessary to promote strong families capable of preparing our children for the future, and a budgetary path that will leave them with a sustainable one. The agenda we're talking about over the next few days is must pass for America. It will sound different from the agenda talked about in the halls of power or the pages of Politico or the scorecard of the United States Chamber, but that's the point. Our first speaker this afternoon is a man who's fought for opportunity for all Americans in every role that he's had. As a congressman first elected in 1998, Jim DeMint fought for health savings accounts, for entitlement reforms and personal accounts within Social Security, and for fundamental tax reform that provide growth and opportunity throughout our economy. As a senator first elected in 2004, he led the fight to end earmarks, and he brought change to Washington in the face of Marco Rubio and Pat Toomey, Cruz, Mike Lee, and Rand Paul. He's now the president of the Heritage Foundation. I'm very pleased to introduce the real Mr. Smith who's come to Washington, Jim DeMint.
Good job. Thank you, Mike. Thank all of you for being here. Happy New Year to everyone, and it's great to have so many join us. Heritage is honored to bring together members of Congress, staffers from the Hill, leaders of other organizations, thousands of Heritage members who are joining us online, and our friends in the media for our second annual Conservative Policy Summit hosted by Heritage Action. Last year's summit had 73 members of the media joining us, including Fox, C-SPAN, CNN, ABC. Over 19,000 people watched our live stream and on our website, and we expect even more this year. I'll be returning this afternoon to introduce Senator Cruz and tomorrow to introduce Senator Rand Paul, so I hope I'll see all of you back here again. At Heritage, we see ourselves as representatives for freedom-minded Americans, a vocal constitutional conscience to the federal government, a North Star that helps lawmakers navigate a precarious landscape fraught with special interest pulling them in all directions. The pressures in Washington keep Congress in a foxhole mentality, fighting one battle after another without telling Americans where they're trying to lead the country. But conservatives can inspire and motivate by showing Americans how our ideas and policies will make their life better and our country stronger. This is the purpose of the Conservative Policy Summit, to inspire Americans with real solutions. You will hear from congressmen and senators about their policy ideas that will build stronger and safer communities, a stronger economy with more job opportunities, and a stronger America. It may shock you to hear, but the congressmen and senators you'll hear from today are the real progressives in Washington. They're fighting against the status quo, committed to ending business as usual in Washington, and showing Americans how we can progress to a better future. It's all about opportunity for all and favoritism for none. We see the need to progress to a nimble, citizen-centered government where people have many choices in all areas of their lives, not just the one choice offered by the government. If we can do it with cell phones and computers, we can do it with health care and education, and especially values. Americans must be free to decide what they believe and what they value without government-sponsored intimidation. Those who call themselves progressives in Washington are the protectors of the status quo, the ones calling for more failed big government solutions. It's the independent-minded conservatives who are offering the roadmap to real progress. Ask yourself, where are the bold, student-centered reforms in education coming from now? Certainly not from the liberal leaders in lockstep with teachers' unions trying to shut down parent-directed choices, public charters, and more opportunities for students. But they are coming from people like Representative Luke Messer, who will be here to tell us about the Choice Act, a plan to return dollars and education decisions to families. Or ask Mike Lee and Representative Ron DeSantis about the HERO Act, which aims at reforming the accreditation process in higher education to break the liberal monopoly in universities and give students a lot more for their money and more marketable skills. What about new energy solutions that will lower the cost of living for regular Americans and eliminate our dependence on unfriendly foreign countries for oil? Don't look to the radical left, those who call themselves progressives, but never saw a pipeline they didn't want to shut down, or a technology they didn't want to regulate, or air they didn't want to tax. Instead, look to representatives like Jeff Duncan, whose EXPAND Act will encourage a modern, all-of-the-above approach to energy production and will incentivize further development, not by carving out tax breaks, but by lowering rates across the board. Ask yourself, who is dedicated to shining a spotlight on corruption? Who wants to cut waste, fraud, and abuse? It can't be this administration, which the Associated Press has determined is the least transparent in history, or the financial giants who are too big to fail, but not too big to bail. If you want to end the secrecy and cozy relationships between big government and big business, turn to people like Jeb Hensarling, whose PATH Act gets government out of the mortgage business and gets taxpayers off the hook and allows free competition. Or catch Tom Price this afternoon, who is dedicated to filling the House Budget Committee with sunshine so that every American can know their money is being spent wisely. These are just a few of the innovative legislators we'll be hearing from today and tomorrow. The fact is, our guests see a problem and say, we need to change something. The political establishment sees a problem and says, we need more money and more of the same. It is obvious then who offers real progress. For real progressives, all the solutions have something in common, no matter what the issue is. In order to give people freedom in education, prosperity at home, and dignity in society, we need to clear the roadblocks of cronyism ahead. Decades of mismanagement in Washington have left the path of opportunity littered with hazards. The snowbanks of favoritism can freeze Congress to inaction. Boulders of backroom deals can stop us dead in our tracks. So we must clear out these obstacles to move forward. We must not be tempted by detours just to avoid confrontations with the left, because they will fight to hold every inch of ground that they have taken from freedom. We must be willing to fight to retake freedom's sacred ground. This drive to real progress will have many backseat drivers and naysayers. There are so many people who benefit from the status quo. The people who condemn capitalism and business on the campaign trail, instead of distancing themselves when they get in office, they invite their cronies to help write legislation to eliminate their competition. And what is the result? Regular Americans get shut out of the decision-making process. Small businesses are subjected to expensive regulations crafted by the big dogs, and equality under the law comes second to sweetheart deals. This is neither the free market nor responsible regulation. It is cronyism. It is the single greatest roadblock to reform, and you can find it everywhere in Washington. But today we're giving notice to those who use the law as profiteers, whether they walk in the halls of Congress or Wall Street. These are the folks who have bent the greatest institutions of common good to serve their own ends. Our rallying cry is opportunity for all, but favoritism for none. The policies we'll hear about during this summit reflect this vision. I know millions of Americans across this great nation share it. It seems that the only place that does not share this vision is Washington itself. I ask you to join me in welcoming all those progressives who come here today with better solutions for a stronger and prosperous Americans. And I look forward to being a part of it with you. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Senator DeMint, and thank you everybody for being here. Our first speaker will be here in just a couple minutes, so we'll have about a 5-minute intermission here. I'm Tim Chapman. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Heritage Action for America, and I'll be your MC over the next couple days, and very much look forward to it. But 5 minutes, Tom Price will be in to talk about what he's working on the Budget Committee, and we'll get back going in a few minutes. Thanks. Well, Congressman Price assumes the budget chairmanship at a very important time in our nation's history. As we all know, the country has enormous challenges right now, and the House Budget Committee is at the forefront of addressing all of these challenges. He ascends to the chairmanship with big shoes to fill, frankly. Congressman Paul Ryan has been a very effective advocate for reform. He, in his tenure as chairman, he introduced the Ryan Roadmap, which began a national conversation about where we go in the future, about entitlement reform, tax reform, how to repeal Obamacare, what to put in Obamacare's place. Before the Ryan budgets, entitlement reform, especially Medicare reform, these were the third rail of politics. Reform those at your own political peril. And there was a lot of criticism at the time when the Ryan budgets first came out that this was too dangerous for Republicans. Well, we see what's happened with Republicans. Their numbers in the House of Representatives keep going up. Their numbers in the Senate are going up. This is not the third rail of politics anymore. Liberal scaremongering about this has actually become fairly ineffective. Not that it's not something to still be considered, but we've seen that it can be beaten back. You know, remember the ads of pushing Granny off the cliff? Those didn't work so well in this last election. And I think that what we've learned about this is that the American people are plenty smart, have plenty of wisdom, and when they see you take a bold stand for something that will help them in their daily lives, they'll rally to your side. It's a reason to be encouraged, and it's a reason for more members of Congress to have political courage to address these kinds of issues. So Congressman Price picks up the mantle on the successes of the past, and we really think there's not a better person to do this right now. He's been an ally of ours at Heritage on conservative issues for a long time. He's always been a reliable, staunch conservative in the House of Representatives. So taking this chairmanship and then pushing the ball further down the field is going to be something that we enjoy partnering with him on. He will be at the tip of the spear in 2015. So we look forward to hearing from him today about what we can expect to be working with him on in 2015 and where we can go. Please join me in welcoming Tom Price to the stage.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Tim, so very, very much. Good afternoon, all. Great to be with you and back at Heritage here. I want to thank Heritage for the opportunity to be here in Heritage Action, for the work that you all have done. It is incredibly important work to continue the advocacy on behalf of all Americans, and we appreciate what you've done. I want to thank all of you for showing. I see some familiar faces in the audience and some not so familiar, so welcome. You may have just stumbled in out of the cold and the rain and found yourself at a fascinating opportunity, but hopefully this was the spot where you intended to be during this hour. I've got a hard stop at 1, and I apologize for that, but I'll make some remarks and then we'll do some Q&A, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you all would like to speak about. I've been asked to talk about House Budget Committee and some of the deadlines that are coming up early in the year so that you can hopefully get a handle on what we're looking at. I can't tell you how excited I am about the opportunity to chair the House Budget Committee. The opportunities that we have are really remarkable. The past 4 years, if we're honest, have been a muddled mess. With what we have seen from the Senate Democrats and the kind of activity that the House struggled to get through the floor, even though we would put good policy in the Senate, it just got shoved into Harry Reid's bottom drawer. And so I can't tell you how excited I am about the opportunity to work with a Senate that I believe really wants to get something done and hopefully get things to the President's desk. I think we're in a win-win situation. If we can get anything to the President's desk, we win. Because if he signs it, it'll be good policy for the American people. If he vetoes it, then it begins to demonstrate to the American people that contrast, that we've been unable to do so because of the muddled mess over the last 4 years, that contrast between the folks who are really trying to solve the challenges and the problems that we face in this country and who's standing in the way. The President's going to be laid bare and the Emperor has no clothes. So I can't tell you how excited I am about moving forward with the Budget Committee. The budget, as you know, isn't just numbers on a sheet of paper. It's our vision. It's the kinds of policies and programs that we would put in place to address the challenges and the problems that we have so that we can provide for an opportunity for all Americans to have a greater opportunity to succeed. And that's what a budget is. And so we will lay out our path for real hope and real opportunity as we move forward. A few years ago, many of you will recall that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then Mike Mullen, was asked what he thought was the greatest threat to national security for the United States. The greatest threat. This is the highest ranking military officer in the country who was asked what the greatest threat was to our national security. And you all know what he replied. The debt. $18 trillion and growing at this point, now exceeds the total debt, now exceeds the gross domestic product in this country, and we're on an absolutely unsustainable path. And the Budget Committee is where we begin to get our fiscal house in order. Now, why do we want to do that? Again, as I say, it's not just numbers on a page. It's not just making things add up to zero at the bottom line when we get there to get a balanced budget. But with a debt that size, paying the interest on the debt, servicing that debt, every single dollar that services that debt is a dollar that can't be used for education, that can't be used for health care, that can't be used for transportation, that can't be used for energy, that can't be used for national security. It is literally at a point where it is approaching choking off the actual vitality of our great country. So that's the reason. It's not just numbers on a page. It is making certain that we provide for a greater amount of opportunity for all Americans. You all know now that we find ourselves in a situation where we as a nation are spending about $3.6 trillion a year, $3.6 trillion a year in its entirety. $2.6 trillion of that basically is 3 or 4 things: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. Interest on the debt, by the way, is scheduled to approach $1 trillion within a 10-year period of time, within the budget window. Again, those are all money that we can't use for something else. So 3.6 is the big number. 2.6 is the amount of money that we spend for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and interest on the debt, basically leaving about $1 trillion, round numbers, about $1 trillion for everything else. So when you think about the federal government, you think about roads and energy and education and national defense and all the kinds of things, legislative branch, commerce, justice, everything else except for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. You all are a bright audience. You know that for the last 6 years we've had deficits, annual deficits of greater than $1 trillion for the last 6 years, which means that you could do away with the entire federal government, with the exception of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, the entire government, everything. And in those 4 years, you wouldn't even balance the budget. That's the magnitude of the challenge that we have before us. So when you hear folks say, you don't need to worry about Social Security, you don't need to worry about Medicare, you don't need to worry about Medicaid, they're doing just fine, not a problem. That's not only irresponsible, it's deceitful. They're just not telling you the truth. And so we can continue as a nation to stick our head in the sand, but we're not going to be able to save and strengthen and secure those programs that are absolutely vital for so many of our fellow citizens. That's at the same time that on the revenue side, the money coming into the federal government, as you all well know, is at its highest absolute rate ever. More money collected in the last quarter from the American people than ever. So if you've got that kind of debt and growing debt and those kinds of deficits and you have those kinds of revenue numbers, increasing absolute numbers coming into the federal government, the problem isn't revenue, the problem is spending. And you all know this so very, very well. Now, the 3 ways to solve the problem, right? You can raise taxes. It's our favorite way to do that from our friends on the other side of the aisle. Or you can decrease spending. And to be honest with you, the House has done a pretty doggone good job of holding down the spending that it has been has been available to it on the discretionary side, the non-automatic side, the non-mandatory side. Those numbers have been coming down in real numbers minimally, but coming down each of the last 4 years. But where the problem is, where the big spending is obviously the mandatory, the automatic spending, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So you can raise taxes, you can decrease spending, or you can grow the economy. And that's where we hope to put our major efforts at the Budget Committee, is to putting in place or laying out the vision for how we would grow our economy in a very, very positive way, expand success for the American people. How are we going to do that? We are intent on building on the success that we've had already at the Budget Committee over the last 4 years. As Tim mentioned, the budgets that have been laid out have demonstrated how you get to balance, have demonstrated some of the remarkable things that can be done if you think creatively and have faith in the American people and have faith in the free market system that has made us the greatest nation in the history of the world, and we will build on that success. We will lay out a budget this year. The budget has to be done by the end of March. We will lay out a budget this year that will come to balance within what's called the window, within a 10-year period of time. I hope it's shorter than that, and I'm excited with the new members that we have on the Budget Committee, 10 or 11 new members on the Budget Committee, and we're going to challenge them to find those new ideas and to come up with those creative solutions so that we can get to balance in a shorter period of time. Second, one of the most important things that we can do at the Budget Committee is something that Tim mentioned, that is to normalize the debate about controversial issues. As Tim mentioned, 4 years ago, nobody would have given us a prayer to be able to lay out a solution to save and strengthen and secure Medicare, and thought that we would be able to sustain the onslaught of the challenge from the other side. Everybody said, a lot of folks said, no, you can't do that. And we worked and we worked and we worked and we convinced our colleagues and convinced our friends and moved forward with a positive solution. So positive that the Romney-Ryan team in 12 on that proposal won the senior vote in this country. What that says to us is that we ought to make certain that we continue to find those other areas where we can begin to normalize the debate about how you truly solve the remarkable challenges that we have. We believe that it's important to save and strengthen and secure Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Save, strengthen, and secure. The other side apparently believes that they're all right with them going broke, because every one of those programs is going broke. Every single one. Social Security disability insurance program runs out of all of its monies next year. This isn't in 2080. This is next year. The urgency is huge. So we believe that it's important to put in place the programs and the policies, the positive solutions to save and strengthen and secure Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And I can't wait to have our new members on the Budget Committee sink their teeth into these wonderful issues that are so important to solve if we're going to get our fiscal house in order and be able to create an economy that will thrive and that will grow. Third, I think that we have, on the conservative side, we have either ignored or put on the back burner or lost the whole principle of federalism when it comes to federal government spending and federal government policy and budgeting. It's one of those areas that I hope to normalize again that debate from the Budget Committee. Federalism is so important. Federalism isn't just having states and localities doing the kinds of things that they ought to be doing as opposed to the federal government. Federalism is a policy, a principle that puts in place solutions that allow greater amount of choices and greater amount of opportunity for every single American. That's what federalism does. And so that's what we're going to work hard on, trying to identify those areas where we ought to be able to move forward in a big, big way. Fourth, regulatory reform. The burden, the incredible burden of the regulatory oppression that has come out of this town for years and years, but it's been on steroids for the past 6 years, has to be addressed. We all talk a lot about how the corporate tax rate ought to be decreased. I'm a 0% corporate tax rate guy. I'd like to, corporations don't pay taxes, by the way, as you know. Individuals pay taxes. Corporations collect the taxes. But corporate taxes in this country, we collect about $300 billion a year in corporate taxes. The burden from federal regulations for Americans, large businesses, small businesses, and Americans across this country is at least 5 times that. At least 5 times that, annually. The amount of money that goes into complying with all this federal regulatory scheme is over $1.5 trillion a year. Again, those are monies that we all believe in regulation, ought to be appropriate, right-sized, accountable regulation, not just because somebody in this town has a grand idea about how somebody else ought to do something. And as a physician who practiced for over 20 years, I can tell you there are a lot of folks in this town who think they know how to practice medicine and take care of patients, and they don't, and they don't. And they ought not be able to write the regulations that dictate to individual physicians and in other areas of endeavor, individuals who they know nothing about what that kind of practice or what that kind of endeavor is. So we believe that the Budget Committee is the place to begin to get more of a handle on the regulatory oppression that's going on. Fifth, you've all heard a lot, I suspect, about reconciliation. Reconciliation is a powerful tool of Congress that can be used. It's an important tool, but it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't solve all problems. But reconciliation is absolutely important, and it comes through the Budget Committee. We will provide reconciliation instructions, or what are called reconciliation directives, that we hope we're able to get the Senate to agree upon. The reason it's important is because then it can come back to when it's agreed upon by the Senate and the House, can come back to the floor of the House and the Senate in an expedited fashion, and it only takes a majority vote to pass in the Senate. Doesn't take a supermajority, doesn't take the 60 votes. All sorts of reconciliations have been used for all sorts of things, both good and bad. Reconciliation in some variety was used for Obamacare. Reconciliation was used for the tax reductions of the previous decade, 01 and 03 tax reductions. Reconciliation was used for the Balanced Budget Act of the late 90s, when we actually got to a balanced budget. So, as I say, it's a powerful tool, but it's not a silver bullet. But we believe it's an important tool that we ought to be using. And then finally, at the Budget Committee, we believe that process reform, budget process reform, is absolutely imperative. We are imprisoned right now by a budget process that was written 40 years ago by folks who wanted the default in this town to continue to spend and spend and spend and spend more and more and more. So I look at budget process reform in two areas. One, short term. We got off to a pretty doggone good start with the House rules, with the macroeconomic scoring that we put in place, and I'll say a little bit more on that in a second. And there's some other short-term things that we can do, baseline issues that we might be able to do. And then the long term, not in this Congress, because I don't believe the President has any interest in truly reforming budget process, but in the long term, I believe it's imperative that we rewrite the '74 Budget Act. Rewrite it in a way that is much more responsible, much more accountable, and makes it so that the federal government's role in terms of spending is a default to spend less, not a default to spend more. And so I look forward, again, to working with folks on the committee to make certain that we move in that direction. That's a longer-term prospect. Let me touch on some very specific issues, and then I'm happy to address any questions that folks may have. Macroeconomic analysis or macroeconomic scoring, sometimes called dynamic scoring, I call it accurate and realistic scoring. The Congressional Budget Office is, I believe, imprisoned by rules right now that makes it so that they can't get to the right answer. Over the past 2 months, I've been spending a lot of time on the telephone with economists from around the country, bright minds, men and women who've spent their lives in the economic arena, and asked them what they think ought to be done. And one of the questions I've tried to get the answer from each and every one of them was on macroeconomic analysis, macroeconomic scoring, realistic, accurate scoring. And some of them, almost to a person, they were wholeheartedly supportive of this. And some of them had some great descriptions of what that means. One of them said, we can either do what we're doing right now, which is to be precisely incorrect, or we can do what we ought to do, and that is to be imprecisely correct. Another one of them said, when we send an issue to the Congressional Budget Office and we don't allow them to account for the human activity that occurs when you change policy. We change policy in this town because we think it will affect something. And yet we send it to the Congressional Budget Office to have them score it and say, don't assume it'll change anything. In fact, you can't assume it'll change anything. So that number is 0. So the other economist said, we know it's not 0. It may be somewhere between 1 and 7, but we know it's not 0, so why would we say it's 0? Doesn't make any sense at all. So in our rule that we passed last week in the House, we included, we're dipping our toe in the water. Dipping our toe in the water. This is not changing the sun and the earth as it relates to scoring at Congressional Budget Office. What we've said is that if a policy would result in a change that was greater than 0.25% of gross domestic product, that's about $40 billion. $40 billion. 3 bills in the last Congress would have come under that provision. Then you ought to be able to look at what the effects would be. And you ought to account for those effects, and we ought to be able to use those in our process from a scoring standpoint. This is a small step in the right direction. Second big issue that's coming up quickly is the Sustainable Growth Rate, SGR, the doc fix. It expires, as you know, on March 31st. It is time to fix this. This has been broken since it was instituted, but clearly broken for the last 12 to 13 years. Every single year, Congress runs around trying to figure out how to find the money to cover the hole, to cover the patch, to make it so that we don't push more and more physicians out of the practice of medicine or caring for Medicare patients. This is important in a real way, again, not just to make numbers add up on a page, but to make it so that physicians are able to see seniors and care for seniors. 1 out of every 3 physicians in this country who has a practice that would normally care for seniors has limited the number of seniors that they see. Not because they don't want to take care of them, not because they've forgotten how to practice medicine, but because the numbers just don't add up from a financial standpoint because the federal government is imposing these restrictions on them. 1 out of every 8 physicians in this country who's in a practice that would normally care for seniors says we're not seeing any more. Not seeing any more seniors. Again, not because they've forgotten how to practice medicine, but because of the policies and the rules that have come out of this town. We need to change that, and one way that we can begin to do that is to fix the SGR formula, and I'm hopeful we're able to do that by the end of this first quarter. Third issue is the debt ceiling, as you know, coming due on March 15th. But with the extraordinary measures that are able to be taken, it probably runs into June, July, August timeframe. I think it's important that we appreciate that the debt ceiling provides focus on this issue, but the problem isn't the debt ceiling. The problem's the debt. The problem is the debt, and that's why we need to get our arms around this debt. We need to get our arms around the policies and the procedures that we need to put in place to put us on a path to balance and then to put us on a path to be able to pay off that debt. Again, a great opportunity to focus, and the Budget Committee is going to be front and center on that. Then finally, in terms of an issue, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention health care and Obamacare. Obamacare is not only harming the quality of health care provided in this country, it is harming our economy. Harming our economy. And it's doing so in ways big and small. Not just for medical practices, not just for physicians and hospitals who are trying to care for patients, but for businesses small and large who of their own volition want to be able to provide health coverage for their employees and have found it much more difficult. Wanting to be able to hire more folks and have a cap on the number of individuals that they can hire so that they don't come under the forces and the regulations and the rules of Obamacare. That's not a system that works for people. It may work for government, it may even work for insurance companies, but it doesn't work for people, it doesn't work for patients. So I'm excited about the opportunity to continue to put forward patient-centered, positive solutions, and I hope that we're able to use our budget to put forward some of those programs as well. Great opportunity is going to come, I believe, in June, when the Supreme Court will rule on King v. Burwell. This is the case that's coming before the court. They'll hear the arguments in March. They will rule likely the last week of June and probably the last day of their rulings. This is the one that says that if the law itself, the bill as passed, the law as put into place, did not provide for subsidies to be able to be utilized to provide health coverage for those who get their coverage through a federal exchange. It's very clear. The law is very clear. And this law, if this position, if the Supreme Court agrees with what we believe to be the letter of the law, then this unravels Obamacare pretty doggone quickly. That's a good thing. But it's not a good thing to not have any replacement, not have any solution ready and available for Congress to act upon. And so we need to be ready, willing, and able to move forward with making certain that we stick to the principles of health care, accessibility, affordability, quality, and coverage, and choices, not destroy those principles. And if we do that, I think we'll have a great opportunity to have the President actually support some positive reform when it comes to health care. So exciting and challenging time. Let me thank you for your interest today. Let me thank you for the work that you're doing, and thank Heritage and Heritage Action once again for the wonderful advocacy on behalf of the American people. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you very much, Congressman Price. We have about 12 minutes where the Congressman can take some questions, and we've got questions online. We've got a lot of folks watching online, we've got press, and we've got attendees here, so we'll try to cycle through all the various questions. First question. Right here.
Congressman, there's lots of things that can be done to save budget costs through management reforms in the bureaucracy. Are you looking at those things? And related to your discussion about dynamic scoring, have you thought about doing anything on the cost side? Currently, you can't legislate management savings because they're not scorable under the Byrd Rule.
Right.
Accenture has estimated $50 billion a year in potential cost savings just by squeezing out redundancy and streamlining the government's back office without touching a dollar of program or mission. Have you thought about looking at those kinds of savings and maybe considering a way to get around the Byrd Rule in the future?
Getting around the Byrd Rule is I think, going to be a real challenge without the comprehensive reform of the 74 Budget Act. I view that as a longer-term solution. I haven't met anybody on the Senate side who appears to be willing to tackle that, and because it's statutory, it would take. I think that's better done in the rewrite of the 74 Act. To look at other items, however, that's why I'm in terms of where we can find savings. The GAO and Heritage and others all point to significant savings that can be have been identified and could be utilized. And it's the energy and the enthusiasm and the excitement of the 10 or 11 new members on our committee, the Budget Committee, that we're going to rely on to help us push those kinds of solutions. So absolutely, we've got to be more creative. We've got to be more inventive in how we're solving the challenges on behalf of the American people from a budgetary standpoint. These challenges get worse every year, more difficult every year. And the president who refuses to act on these kinds of things makes it much more difficult for us to get our fiscal house in order. But we're up to the task. I know we're up to the task, and I know the American people are interested in making certain that we fulfill that task.
Right here. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on your comments on Obamacare, are you suggesting then that you're going to have an alternative ready to go, if you will, once the Supreme Court rules? And if so, can you give us a little preview of what you have in mind?
Boy, I sure hope so, but I've hoped so for the last 5, 6 years. Yeah, as I mentioned, the principles of health care that the vast majority of the American people, regardless of your ideological standing or position, the vast majority of the American people support principles that say we ought to have a system that provides for greater affordability of health coverage in this country, greater accessibility of coverage, greater quality of care, and more choices for the American people. Almost everybody believes in that. Now, the problem that we have right now is that what the president has put in place with his law is something that violates every single one of those principles. So affordability is going down. The costs haven't come down by $2,500 a family. They've gone up by at least that on average per family. The accessibility has gone down. You've heard of the narrowing of the networks that's occurred. Physicians are not, patients aren't able to find the accessibility of the physicians that they have. Quality is decreasing. If you talk to my former colleagues, they'll tell you that the quality of health care in this country is being diminished because of the law, and choices are clearly being limited. So if you step back and say, okay, if we want to put in place a policy that would adhere to those principles, what's it look like? It looks like something that says we need to make certain that it's affordable. So you got to expand the ability for individuals to gain coverage in all sorts of ways. Those folks in the individual and small group market who are truly threatened by increasing costs and by the pre-existing illness exclusion that has existed, those folks need to be able to access a risk pool, insurance risk pool, that's large enough to be able to spread the risk so that their costs come down, don't go up. I think we need to be able to say to folks that any health coverage policy that you're able to purchase that is approved by your state insurance commissioner or state insurance department, and anyone that they deem to be appropriate coverage, you ought to have access to. We ought not be dictating from Washington what you must buy, forcing it down your throat and through your pocketbook. Quality measures need to be determined and settled by specialty societies in the field of medicine, not bureaucrats here in Washington, D.C. And choices need to be expansive for patients. So if you step back and you accept those principles as principles of the American people as it relates to health care, and then you pretty much have a clear path to what the policies would be.
Right here, John.
Dr. Price, should you win the Supreme Court case on Obamacare in June, the Obama administration is clearly going to have at least 2 responses. One to Congress, change the law, and that'll be up to you. But they'll also go to the states and say, lots of people are losing subsidies, please set up an exchange, and then we can start the subsidy money flowing again. What would be your advice to the states, the 35 or 37 states that would be pressured by the Obama administration? Should they ask for complete freedom on Medicaid spending? What should they ask for? They can't just say we're not going to set up an exchange and not negotiate with the Obama administration.
Yeah, the message to the states is there's a better way. There's a way that respects your constituents and the citizens of your state to make certain that we follow those principles that are so dear to all Americans as it relates to health care. In the area of Medicaid, we believe state flexibility is an absolute vital component. In my state of Georgia, there are about 1.8 million individuals on Medicaid. 1.2 million of those folks are healthy moms and kids, for whom the health care costs are minuscule compared to the overall system, and yet we don't allow the state of Georgia, as a federal government, we don't allow the state of Georgia to come up with a more realistic way to be able to cover all of their Medicaid population, thereby saving money actually for the sickest of the sick. So huge state flexibility, we believe, is important. They're wonderful. Indiana's doing great things as it relates to Medicaid. We ought to be able to, again, have the states be the laboratory of ideas when it comes to health coverage for the Medicaid population. So the message is there's a better way, and we believe we are going to be able to get to that point. I think the president is actually going to be open to a better way. We're not interested in just having the states turn around and say, okay, we'll set up our exchange, when we are encumbered by the kinds of rules and regulations from Washington, D.C. Nothing will change from the day before the decision is given, if it's given in favor of our position on King v. Burwell, to the day after, as it relates to the states and the decision that they made 2 or 3 years ago when they said, no, it didn't make any sense for us to set up an exchange. And it doesn't. It doesn't from a financial standpoint, and it doesn't from a who's making decisions and who has choices and opportunities decision.
Right here.
Oh, thank you. And congratulations on your new position.
Thank you.
Budget, Doctor. You said you want to bring down the debt, and you said that 2.6 trillion of the 3.6 trillion budget is in Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and in the interest. But then you also said that you want to save, strengthen, and secure these 3 programs, these entitlement programs. So my question would be, where are you looking to find the savings? Are personal retirement accounts on the table for Social Security, vouchers to buy insurance in Medicaid? Where exactly will you cut if the goal is to save and to strengthen and to secure these programs that are costing?
Well, that's where the good news lies. And that is that these programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, all of them are destined to go bankrupt on their current course with the current policies. And again, as I mentioned, apparently our friends on the other side want them to do so because they haven't proposed anything to save any of these programs. The good news is that you can actually save, strengthen, and secure them and save money at the same time. The model that we have proposed for saving and strengthening and securing Medicare actually covers more individuals, saves money for the individual, and saves money for the federal government, all at the same time that you respect the principles, providing greater choices and higher quality of care for seniors. Why would you turn your back on that? It astounds me that our friends on the left say, oh, I see that would make more sense. You actually spend less and have higher quality care and greater choices for the American people. But, oh, no, we don't want to do that. We want to make certain we can continue to control this system. The area of Medicaid, state flexibility, huge state flexibility, actually saves money. It's a more predictable line item for the federal government. It's a more predictable line item for the state government. Provides greater choices for patients, higher quality of care, greater access to care. And we as a federal government say, oh, no, let's not do that. This is lunacy. In the areas of Social Security, it has indeed been the third rail, as Tim mentioned, and I'm hopeful that what the Budget Committee will be able to do is to begin to normalize the discussion and the debate about Social Security. This is a program that right now on its current course will not be able to provide 75 or 80% of the benefits that individuals have paid into in a relatively short period of time. That's not a responsible position to say, oh, you don't need to do anything to it. So all the kinds of things that you know about, whether it's means testing, whether it's increasing the age of eligibility, the kind of choices, whether it's providing much greater choices for individuals to have voluntarily select the kind of manner in which they believe they ought to be able to invest their working dollars as they go through their lifetime. All those things ought to be on the table and discussed. And that's why I'm so excited about the new members on my committee, because they've got great enthusiasm and energy about this one issue.
Maybe last question here, right in the back. There's a
Is Mitt Romney the kind of partner you would want to have for budgeting in the Oval Office, or is there somebody you would rather be working with?
Well, anybody that I've heard who's thinking about running on the Republican side is a better partner than the one we've got right now in the Oval Office. So,
And of the choices you have there.
What I'm hopeful we're able to do at the Budget Committee is begin to lay out that vision and have it be so exciting and so positive and so productive that whoever is able to succeed through the gauntlet of the nomination process on the Republican side looks to the Budget Committee and looks to the House and said, those are the kinds of policies that I support and that will take to the American people.
Thank you, Congressman
Thank you all
Price.
so much.
Thank
Take care. God bless. Okay, thank you, Congressman Price.
Great stuff. Now I'd like to introduce two panelists. We're going to have a conversation about all the things that we just heard and what we might be able to expect in 2015 budget-wise. Romina Baccia is our Grover M. Herman Fellow in Budgetary Affairs here at the Heritage Foundation, and will be our point person on these issues. And Jason Fichtner is the Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center, who works on those issues over at Mercatus. So, thanks for coming up to the stage. Please welcome them, and we'll have a 30-minute conversation here and then a break. Okay, thank you. I've asked both Jason and Romina to give brief opening remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions. Romina, could you begin?
Thank you for the introduction, Tim. Thank you all for being here today. I want to focus my remarks on how the new Congress can control government spending and reduce waste. And so I'm so pleased to follow Representative Price with those remarks. The first thing that the House and Senate have an opportunity to do now is to agree on a budget resolution. And that budget resolution needs to address growing spending and debt at its root. The current $500 billion deficit of this year has been hailed as a great improvement, but to the extent that it is an improvement, it is a very fleeting one indeed, because before the end of the decade, the deficit is projected to exceed trillion-dollar levels again. So in order to rein in this growing deficit, it's important that we understand what's driving it, and then we can control it. So what's driving this growth in spending and the debt? 85% of the projected growth in spending over the next decade is driven by healthcare and retirement entitlements and interest on the debt. So that's where reforms need to target. To balance the budget before the end of the decade, we saw in the last House budget, it takes more than $5 trillion in cuts, and that is assuming you start cutting right away. If you decide to cut in future years and not address spending next year, it takes bigger cuts to get to that balance point. So the sooner lawmakers can start cutting, the better. And where exactly should they start? Repealing Obamacare has to be their first priority, simply because 44% of the growth in entitlement spending is driven by the healthcare law. So if we are to rein in growing spending and debt, Obamacare is where we need to start. And this needs to be combined with reforms to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. During this process, lawmakers should be guided by focusing benefits on those individuals with the greatest need and delivering those benefits in a more efficient manner. As we'll hear from my colleague Jason Fichtner, improper payments are a big issue, and healthcare entitlements are where some of the highest improper payment rates are in the federal government. Now, beyond that, there's also still too much waste, duplication, and overlap in the federal budget. Sequestration has helped to cut some of that, but the sequester itself is very small, and it's a very blunt instrument. So we need other reforms that really get at reducing overlap and duplication and rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. And one recommendation is to adopt a waste commission that operates similar to BRAC. What that commission would do, it would have to be bipartisan and be guided by objective criteria and go through the federal budget, through the domestic budget, by agency, by program, and identify those areas, also guided by work from the Government Accountability Office, identify those areas where we can reduce waste, cut duplication, and make government work better and more efficiently for taxpayers. So that's another reform that I think would help to root out big spending. While we're talking about sequestration, it was intended to be a mechanism that forces lawmakers to agree to important budget reforms that actually address our spending and debt crises. Unfortunately, that mechanism failed, but the sequester will return next year, and so we have another opportunity to have this debate. To honor the original intent of the Budget Control Act and what the sequester was intended to do, we need to focus on what's our core national priority, which is national defense. National defense has been underfunded in the base budget, and lawmakers have been evading the budget caps using the war account to fund things that should be part of the base budget. So recognizing that we need to fully fund our defense needs and cut spending in those areas where it's growing the fastest, and cutting those things where the government shouldn't be engaged in the first place, namely priorities that are purely private or should be done on a state and local level. Those are the kinds of guidelines that should guide the Budget Committee and that should guide lawmakers this year and the following year.
Thank you, Romina. Jason?
Thank you. First of all, I kind of want to just start by saying I was really heartened with Chairman Price's talk. For a lot of us who've been, I always joked that I'm on the 22nd year of my 5-year plan in D.C., and I figured I'd come here out of undergrad, do 2 years of grad school, 3 years work, and I was going to Colorado. But I've been here longer. We've been studying politics and policy. And oftentimes we hear sometimes members say one thing, do another. Sometimes they misspeak, don't understand the issues. Congressman Price went through a laundry list of things he wants to change that's been on our list for a long time. And it's very heartening to see him understand the issues and lay them out and being honest about them and what the challenges are in front of us. And so there was a question that one of the gentlemen over here asked about, you don't get statutory changes or you can't get budget changes in scoring for management changes, which is very important. Doesn't mean we have to look at these, though, because there are actually some very important issues. And I'm going to bring two to your attention. One is improper payments. These aren't just fraud. They're fraud, waste, and abuse, but they're basically something that happens when we give the wrong check to the wrong person or the wrong amount. It could be doctors overbilling. It could be underbilling. It could be people who are not eligible for a program but still continue to get benefits. And to give you an idea, take Medicare, fee-for-service. Last year, we had $36 billion in improper payments in Medicare. That's 10% of the program's cost. Take something that seems to be very popular amongst both Democrats and Republicans, the Earned Income Tax Credit. Had a 25% improper payment rate. That's $14 billion, but again, it's 24 or 25% of the program costs. These are things that we start looking at again, trying to cut down on improper payments. Better management of the program, not just fraud, but waste and abuse, can save us money. Whether it goes into the baseline or not, it should be things we look at and trying to encourage agencies to do better. On that similar note, Congressman Price did talk about how the 74 Budget Act kind of imprisons a lot of some of these actions we see going on, not just in the administration, but also in Congress. And one of these we've always heard about in this town is what's called year-end spending, which is right now you have what's called a use-it-or-lose-it phenomenon. If the agencies don't spend all their money, they lose it. They don't get to keep any of it. They don't get it back. It all goes to the Treasury. So we see this kick at the end of the budget year in September for agencies to spend more and more money on things they may not need, just so they can go to Congress and say, guess what? We spent all our money, now give us more next year. So I did some research just about a few months ago because now there's more data online on usaspending.gov. We pulled down just contract data, just what agencies are doing by their contracts. And if you think about a 12-month cycle, a year cycle, if you could smooth out your contract spending, you'd spend a little more than 8% per month. Now, you may want to do more or less at the beginning because you don't know when the money's coming in. But for example, the Department of State had 38% of its spending on contracts in the last month of the fiscal year. Seems kind of high, doesn't it? You had HHS, healthcare, 29% in September of the last fiscal year. Some agencies do fine. Treasury does 9.9%. DOE does 6%. Some can smooth it out, but we're seeing a lot of what I would call seemingly wasteful spending happening at the end of the year. We need to take a lot of look at how agencies are spending year-end money and trying to give some incentives to actually curtail that to control costs. This goes into the idea of the baselines. Romina was talking about the idea of how you can balance the budget or budget by cutting. In 2011, when Senator Connie Mack was around, we did a look at what he wanted to call the one penny plan, which I ended up calling the 1% solution. Which is, could you cut spending by 1% per year And if you could you balance the budget? And you could do it in about 4 years back in 2011. But when we started doing the research, you didn't necessarily have to cut spending. You just had to control the growth of spending to balance the budget in a 10-year window. In fact, when we did this back in 2011, the government could grow it at 2% per year and still get 18% of revenues of GDP and balance the budget in a 10-year window. So this is a very funny time because of the baselines. And Congressman Price alluded to the trying to change how we talk about baselines. Baselines assume a certain amount of spending increases every year. So assume for a minute that a program is assumed to get 3% spending more next year, and Congress decides to only give it 1% spending. The Democrats would say, you just cut spending. But you didn't cut spending. You didn't cut it at all. You're still spending more next year than you are this year, but you're slowing the growth of spending. So we really should take a look at, one, where can we control the growth of spending and actually reduce it? And the second thing is, where can we actually make realistic cuts that says you're spending X this year, we want less than X next year, and prioritize. We don't necessarily have a chance to do that because of the weird scoring rules that come out with baselines now and how those baselines are interpreted by the media and by opposition to those who don't want to see government spending curtailed. And that's very sort of problematic. Romina also pointed to, and so did Congressman Price, about some things that are coming up next year that are sort of milestones, areas that will focus our attention to have a discussion. There's the debt ceiling debate. There's going to be the sequestration, which will expire, or the controls that sequestration will come back in because the controls for the Murray-Ryan plan will cease to exist and expire. We've got the DI Trust Fund, Disability Insurance Trust Fund, going insolvent in 2016. Of course, the budget process in general. So there are a lot of issues now we need to focus on. What does it mean to have priorities? What should our spending priorities be? And again, focus on what are cuts? What are slowing of the growth? What's quote-unquote useful spending? We're not saying all spending is bad, but again, we have the three major entitlements growing rapidly. And when Congressman Price talks about trying to save the programs, secure them, and make sure that they're around even with savings, the savings don't have to be, again, cuts from zero, cuts from last year. We really need to slow the growth of spending. If we can slow the growth of those programs, we'll go a long way towards balancing those programs' fiscal obligations and also balancing our financial position in the U.S. government.
Thank you. Okay, let's open it up for questions.
You guys got to have some.
Right here. Yeah, right here. And we'll go there next.
Thank you, and for your presentation, and I agree. But I think when we start talking about what actually has to be done in Social Security reform, Medicare, Medicaid, there is some concern about turning these programs into welfare programs, testing them. There's concern to increase retirement age, and while I agree with you that we can find places to cut budget, we can look for the waste in the city. I, like you, have been here longer than I thought as well, so we're looking forward to those opportunities. But to ignore the obvious that these three programs are driving this city's growth, I would like to just hear a little bit more detail about our retirement, personal retirement accounts on the table. Will there be discussion and energy toward getting that in Social Security? And then number two, on Medicaid questions, it sounds nice to say we'll just kind of block it to the states and hopefully they might be able to get this work done. Is there any discussion about changing the program on this, from this city to include vouchers for the poor to buy insurance similar to what the federal employees already have? How much new energy is going into new ideas?
So that's a great question. Again, we're not members of Congress, so I can't tell you what they're thinking. But what we're also, we testify on Capitol Hill. We speak to members and their staff. So we'll tag team a little bit. But on the Social Security side, I think we also need to be very careful when we talk about increasing the retirement age. Because when we say increasing the retirement age, the left says that's a benefit cut. Social Security, when it first started, the retirement age to get full benefits was 65. The average age that people lived to was about 65 or 66. So you had basically benefits for a year if you lived that long. Now the average age that you live on benefits is 78 going into 80s. So in some ways, we've had an artificial benefit increase by not tying the retirement age to longevity. So what we need to do is go back to sort of a neutral idea of what Social Security meant. Now we're basically looking at trying to fund 30 years of retirement on 40 years of work. The program's not sustainable like that. So when we talk about raising the retirement age, it really looks at going back to what I call a neutral position, where people are incentivized to work, not going on early retirement for benefits. But what does it mean to actually be able to work nowadays? A lot of people are working into their 70s. They want to. Some can't. Some actually work in hard blue-collar jobs. They're not in air-conditioned environments, and they might have to retire at 62 or 63. So I think we need to look at how we actually increase the retirement age to incentivize folks to work longer, but provide a minimum benefit for those who really can't work past 62 or 63, 64, 65. And that's sort of the compromise we can make that saves the program, saves money, but still protects those who really need it while changing the incentives. And it's the incentive part. You got to personal accounts. I don't know whether they're back on the table or not, but I can tell you that Social Security disincentivizes people from saving originally. And we need to look at how that program disincentivizes savings and go back to looking at Social Security as being something that's part of the three-legged stool of retirement. Part of that was Social Security, part was employer-provided pensions, the third was personal savings. Right now, we're underfunding personal savings because Social Security sort of crowds that out. On Medicaid, right now, again, we're economists. We always focus on incentives, or sometimes in government programs we call perverse incentives. Are you giving the wrong incentives to spend money? Medicaid, basically, there's an old joke that says if you've seen one Medicaid program, you've seen one Medicaid program. You've got 50 states, you've got the territories, they're all a bit different. They're state-run programs with federal matching dollars. The way the federal government gives money incentivizes states to do all sorts of weird games to up their allocation of money. Part of what a block grant's supposed to do is remove those incentives. So I think we need to look at what block grants could do and also vouchers, because what you want to do is get more individuals, consumers, having a stake in where their health care dollars go. And that's not the current system now with the ACA or with Medicaid.
I just want to add that when it comes to discussing private retirement savings, I think it's so important that people control more of their retirement decisions, and that comes with control of their retirement dollars. Now, Social Security's original purpose was to protect against destitution in old age. The program is very different today, and it actually leaves many seniors with benefit levels that are too low, where they are, in addition to Social Security benefit, relying on other welfare programs. So one proposal that I think is not receiving enough attention is to look at instituting a flat benefit that targets somewhere around the federal poverty level, so that those individuals who have worked 35 years do live at a level where it's sustainable, but that also means targeting benefits on those who need them the most. There are many millionaires who receive Social Security today. The question is that, does that make sense? Do they really need that benefit? Is it affordable for us to keep giving Social Security benefits to millionaires? So I think means testing is also a provision that deserves more attention. But still, keeping in mind that Social Security is only one part of the retirement safety net. It's not supposed to fund a comfortable, generous retirement. That is what private retirement savings are for. And there are certainly ways, and I know there's interest also on Capitol Hill, to eliminate some of the regulatory barriers that are keeping especially small employers from offering retirement plans to their workers. If you're looking at who has access to a retirement plan today and who doesn't, those workers who don't, they tend to work for smaller employers, and they're the ones who need those plans the most because they're less likely to go out and open an IRA on their own. So proposals like auto-enrollment IRAs can really do a lot to help more workers save for their own retirement and be in control of those retirement decisions.
Just really quickly, one thing to add, because Romina brought it up, and it's a good point. The technical term for Social Security for retirement is actually the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund. So you're basically trying to insure against old age and then widows or widowers. It was never meant to be a long-term 20-year retirement program, which is what it's turned into.
Great. We have a question down in the front row.
I'm kind of a basic person with basic questions. But I know 40 years ago, I worked in the government in a very, very minor way, and they were doing that same type thing. At the end of the year, they were given so much in their budget for the year. They would come up with programs, they would take trips, they would go spend the money some way and say they had to have that amount and ask for more. I assume that hasn't changed in 40 years. I don't know if it's ever been addressed. And then the other side is just all these programs do need to be cut. We need to save on everything. What of the idea, I can't remember if it was the penny plan or the whatever, you just cut back 5% every year. Every organization makes its cuts. What has happened with that?
So you're right, it doesn't get enough attention about where what I would call excessive or what seems like unusual year-end spending happens. And again, because part of it is the incentive isn't there. The incentive is to spend it, as you well know. And so there have been some very, very small pilot projects which we should expand. Department of Justice had one for their IT department that said if you don't spend all your money, you can keep part of it and roll it over to additional year. So you don't just waste it on computer systems. Senator Coburn, before he left, now previous Senator Coburn, was interested in these types of plans. What we need to do is look at where can we find examples where it'd be good for a pilot program, where we can give the agencies authority to hold on to some of that money. Some goes back to Treasury, some stays in the agencies, they can use it, but also at the same time have GAO or somebody monitor it and actually do a report on it. So we can get sort of best practices and see what worked, what didn't for various agencies, and then try to expand it to the federal government. With the penny plan or 1% solution, one of the problems with sequester in general was there's an across-the-board cut. As we all know, budgeting means you've got to set priorities. You have to make tough decisions. Telling everyone agency across the board 1% is not a tough decision. That's not budgeting. It's taking a blunt instrument. What we should do instead is say, you have to cut 1% a year, but we're paying you as professional managers and executives. You tell us where the proper place is. Or do something through reconciliation. Reconciliation language sets directives. There are targets. You get this amount of revenue, you get this amount of spending for these types of, and the allocations for the various appropriations committees. We could say you have to cut 1%. That's the target. You figure out where it goes. That way you can set priorities. Until we do that, it looks like a blunt instrument. We've got to basically set the target, and that those who have the understanding of the programs and the administration figure out where it has to go. If you look back through defense spending, there are various times where departments, secretaries of defense who have raised the budget for DOD were unliked because they had their pet project they wanted to go to. Where those secretaries who said we're cutting it, but told the generals, you can decide where it gets cut from, were more successful and more liked. So we need to take a focus that way when it comes to the budget.
If I may just add one thing, if you look at where sequester has cut, what agencies have done to the extent that they have had flexibility is they have cut some of this conference spending, traveling to nice locations to go to conferences. But then on the other hand, it's also affected defense tremendously. In order to have lasting cuts, we need to start looking at reducing the size and scope of government, and that means eliminating programs that we know that don't work, programs that are outside the proper scope of the federal government. And that's where it gets tough, because that's where you really have that special interest pressure. The people whose paychecks get paid by those programs, the people who benefit from them, they don't necessarily care as much if they're an efficient use of federal taxpayer dollars, but it's something they benefit from directly. So for lasting spending cuts, reducing the size and scope of government is critical. I think a BRAC commission can help do that. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but certainly a good place to get started.
Yes, sir, right here.
In trying to address your issue, why don't we use outside these internal reviews and inspection, the inspector general of every department? That's internal. We don't want internal. We want external examination. There are plenty of the major consulting firms, the think tanks. We can get independent people who really know what they're doing and who know math, and they can report on what's going on here, and they don't have, let's say, they're immune to political pressure. We got to get reality, and we are not going to get it from internal personnel. They all have some pressure, and they all respond to that. Let's get around them and get the people that will tell us the truth.
So the BRAC Commission is intended to be a bipartisan and objective, independent of government. But I do think that the GAO and the Inspector Generals are actually doing a very good job identifying areas for improvement, identifying areas for managerial improvements. What the problem is that those improvements rarely get made. And to the extent that congressional action is necessary to make some of these changes, there's so much else to do. There's very little glory in eliminating a program, especially if people face layoffs. There's even less glory in that. So to some extent, it's not that we don't know where to cut, that we don't know which programs work and which ones don't. We do have some good government reports that help guide those decisions, but it's that from recognizing the problem, the next step is missing. Where's the action to actually get rid of some of these programs?
I think that's exactly right. It comes in the action. When you were talking, what popped in my mind was Ronald Reagan's famous quote, but it wasn't about government spending, but it was about politics and foreign relations, which is trust but verify. And that seems to work for a lot of issues we deal with in our life. But when it comes to government spending, you can have the internal IGs. They do a good job. They, on the most part, do a good job, and they're independent. But there should be some verification with some spot checking where GAO or an outside consulting group is asked by Congress to spot check, pick a few, random, study them, and then report back to Congress whether or not these studies were done properly and fairly. And again, Ramina's right. We know where a lot of the waste and abuse is coming from. The problem is the action and trying to solve them, and that's where our, one thing where, again, I think a 1% solution type works is you're setting the framework and you're saying it's a lock. You got to figure out how to do it, but now we've got the benchmark, and it's not, well, I can't do it here, I can't do it here, or you don't understand why I can't do it here. I don't care where you do it. You've got 1%. You figure out how to find it. That's what we're paying you for. I think that's a framework, like sort of like a BRAC type commission that could work. When you set a hard framework, someone's got to figure out how to do it.
I think also congressional oversight is so hard to do these days because the federal government has grown so big. There are over 2,200 federal domestic assistance programs. It's very difficult to do proper oversight when government is just too big to do it.
Well, there's also, and this goes back to Congressman Price talking about looking at the 74 Budget Act. Right now, we budget every year. Congress budgets, and they're supposed to do oversight. When budget's taking up so much of their time every year, where's the time for oversight? We might want to look at going to a 2-year budget process where the budget's set after the election and oversight's done during the election year to give Congress more time to actually look at reports, deliberate, and talk about where spending is going.
If only they used it for that.
Right here.
And Tim, that guy had a question. Okay.
Hi, thanks for your remarks. One of the comments that Congressman Price made was that he said that the budget is not just numbers, but it's a vision. And I guess if I could take up that mantle for a second, my question is about messaging and how much you think that our cause may be hurt by focusing too much on sort of the numbers and on, well, we just need to balance the budget, rather than on what I think most people in this room would agree is the core problem, which is that we should be reducing spending because government spends things inefficiently, and these resources would be better spent in the private sector. And so do either of you think that we sort of sometimes miss the forest for the trees by focusing solely on budgetary matters and not on spending at its core?
So I'll take the first crack. I think you got to do both. I don't. Too often, if someone takes a singular track and says, let's just focus on balancing the budget, and that's your primary focus, you're missing the forest of the trees. What are you going to get rid of? What are you going to raise money on? What are you going to spend it on? Where do you want to cut? Where do you want to balance? Where do you want to slow growth? Talking about just the programs itself, this is the overall picture, again, that deficits and debt do matter. Again, Congressman Price mentioned that we're up $18 trillion in debt. What he didn't mention is that's over 100% of our gross domestic product. Right? So if everyone here in this entire country worked for a year but didn't spend any of it, just paid it all in taxes, we could just barely, but not even quite yet, pay off our debt. That's a whole year of work. That just gets worse. With each increasing deficit, we're adding to the debt. No one's talking about paying down the debt yet. We're just talking at most about balancing the budget, which means no more additional debt. At some point, we've got to start paying it off. If you haven't been paying attention, the UK is still paying off debt from 200 years ago. Seriously, they're trying to figure out whether or not they should pay off some of the debt from 1812. They're still rolling it over. And so I think what has to happen is we have to have a real discussion about what the drivers of our fiscal position are, both the deficit and, of course, debt being interest, and then how we actually reform those programs. And again, the idea is not just to reduce the size of government, but to spend what we do spend wisely. If you go out and talk to American people about wanting to cut government, they want to cut government. They also want the dollars we do spend to be spent wisely, and we're not doing that either. So we have to have, I think, a holistic conversation about what we're talking about when it comes to balancing the budget and budget process.
The budget is often the starting point, and that's where the policies originate, tend to be in the budget committee, and I think that's why a lot of the rhetoric is around that. And there are numbers associated with it. But I think when it comes to vision, fundamentally we have a vision where individuals have more control over their own lives and they're less dependent on government. And in healthcare, that means controlling their own healthcare dollars and introducing more genuine market competition to control costs rather than the government deciding what treatments and tests get covered and which don't. Those are things that should be between doctors and patients and insurance companies. And on retirement, too, I mean, these are the biggest programs that are driving the growth in spending, and I think when we do reforms, we don't only make the fiscal condition better and help to control the debt and reduce the debt over time, but we're giving people more control over their own lives, greater ability to spend their own health care and their own retirement dollars and make those decisions as to when to retire and how long to work, instead of being nudged and oftentimes pushed even more strongly by government to make a certain decision because of the way that the rules of the game are written. So I think that's the vision, is give individuals more control, they'll be better off, we'll have more market competition, and it'll make us better off fiscally and hopefully stave off higher taxes in the future, which will reduce growth and make everyone worse off.
And keep in mind that the budget, when it comes to priorities, it literally is a institution's or a person's statement of what they think is the priority. It's where campaign rhetoric meets reality. This is what's on paper. This is what we said we were going to do. This is what we are committed to doing. Here's how we're going to fund it. This is it. This is the blueprint. So you've got to sort of lay out your vision in the budget, because that's where you're specifying these are our priorities. No more campaign rhetoric. This is the reality. Here it is on paper. Let's go forward.
I appreciate the question, because it's exactly what we're trying to do here over these 2 days. I mean, our theme here of opportunity for all and favoritism to none fits very well into this. There's an inverse relationship between how big the federal government gets and people's personal freedom. And we are making the argument here as an organization that big government breeds favoritism and it breeds cronyism, because when there's all this money at the trough, that's when you're going to get that kind of deal making that happens. And we want to pare that back for people's individual freedom, for their opportunity. So putting that in that context, putting these reforms in that context, I think is important, because, yeah, I think the subtext of your question is that we can be a little bit like too focused on spreadsheets and too into our numbers, and I think that's right. You got to know the numbers. You got to get it right. That's important. We got to balance. We got to do all those things, but you got to tell people why. I think that's really important. I think we have time for one more question over here. Yes.
Interesting hearing your interest in the idea of a waste commission, something like that. Could you comment on the political prospects for something like that happening? Are there model bills out there? Are there potential sponsors? Who do you think would, and is there bipartisan sponsorship for something like that? What more can you tell us?
I think that there is interest, but the momentum is slowly building. There's one bill in the House right now by Representative Doug Collins that would go through the process, 2 appropriations bills at a time. There were bills in the past, and I know there's more interest. And Representative Kevin McCarthy, he did mention to Politico that he too had an interest in pursuing this with the new Congress. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that if not this year, then next year, there will be more movement on that.
And Jeff Sessions was pushing this idea, and we're working now with the new team over there in budget to see if Senator Enzi will take it up too. It's out there. It's percolating. Okay, let's thank you to the panelists, and we appreciate everyone being here again. Let's take about a 25-minute break. We have Senator Cruz coming up, Congressman Rokita, Jim Jordan, many others. So we have a full afternoon, but feel free to take 25 minutes or so. If you need to run out of the building, there's plenty of sandwich shops around here. Grab something to eat. Otherwise, make yourselves at home on this floor, and we'll start back up in 25 minutes.